Oh man, this is not the kind of thing that we want to see. So Cloudflare had a pretty big outage today at I think around 1:30 a.m. if you're living on the east coast of the United States. Most of us Americans are probably asleep for this. But the outage happened at 19 of their data centers, which happened to be 19 of their busiest data centers. Ones like Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, Tokyo, London. I mean, basically, just pick a city from Pitbull's International Love, and Cloudflare probably had an outage there today. And depending on where in the world you were, a whole bunch of websites and online services and people that were using Cloudflare were not working for about an hour or so. Now, to understand why this caused so many outages, we first have to understand content delivery networks, or CDNs, which is one of the primary services that Cloudflare provides. So a CDN, it basically helps to accelerate data delivery, aka the speed at which a web page loads, or some asset on a web page like a video might load, especially for people who might be physically very far away from the server that the website is actually hosted on. So let's say that I had a web server that's physically located in New York City. That web server is going to be very, very fast for people that are in the northeast of the United States and in Canada. So like if they pinged it, they would have a very, very low ping, a very low latency there. And this server would still be pretty fast for people in, say, the Western Hemisphere, like for the rest of the United States and maybe South America as well, and Western parts of Europe. But for people in places like India, Japan, Australia, the other side of the world essentially, loading the page is going to take longer because, for one, there's a hard limitation in how fast information can travel, right? Can't go faster than the speed of light. And in the case of undersea cables, which are definitely going to be in use with any kind of international communications going on, the information is literally traveling as light through glass, which is actually slower, light traveling through glass than traveling through a vacuum. And typically, there's going to be more hops as well with a farther connection. There's going to be more routers for the data to go through and changing between copper and fiber, which all of that can add more latency. So CDNs, they help to reduce this latency by loading a lot of assets and caching them for various websites and services on local servers. So let's say that you're in India and you're loading up some service where their website is primarily based in New York City. Well, they're going to have a CDN in India to load that website faster. Same thing in whatever country you're in. Well, not literally whatever country, but generally a good CDN is going to have multiple servers on every continent. And because these other servers for the CDN are caching information, they also help to reduce the amount of load that is on your main server, since people in other countries are going to be going to them for a lot of the heavier assets. And this can also increase the uptime of your main server in New York, and it can even help with the security of your server. So Cloudflare provides the service to people at a much cheaper price than if you were to go and try to create your own CDN, essentially. If you were to go and buy a bunch of server space for yourself on every continent, because obviously Cloudflare can take advantage of bulk discounts, and I think they actually own a lot of their own data centers too. So yeah, obviously if they own the infrastructure, then they're able to provide a much better service. And this also makes this CDN technology accessible to smaller businesses, because obviously if everyone had to roll their own CDN, then you would have to get your revenue up quite a bit to make it practical to start hosting servers on every continent. And of course, maintaining a CDN, setting it up, is a very difficult technical endeavor. I mean, hell, Cloudflare is still making some mistakes when they're doing maintenance on it, as we saw, or as we're going to see in this post. But one thing that I will say to praise Cloudflare here is that their incident reporting is top-notch. They were very transparent about this issue. They posted this blog maybe a few hours after they were able to resolve the issue. So, they were the first ones to report on it. It's not like you had to hear it from some third-party news source. And they've been all over social media explaining what happened, that it's not any kind of security breach. There weren't any hackers taking out the service. No customer data was leaked. It was just a mistake that they made when they were changing some things around. So Cloudflare was making some upgrades to their busiest locations, which required updating several parts of their infrastructure, which look a bit different than your typical network. So we've got some edge routers here, and then we've got the spines, which is where the big problem ultimately took place, because these spines are responsible for routing a whole lot of Cloudflare's traffic. Now, Cloudflare and other really big networks like Facebook, Amazon, and ISPs, they utilize the Border Gateway Protocol in order to be reachable on the internet. In fact, Facebook had an issue with their BGP configuration inside of their CDN last year, which I talked about, and that temporarily wiped Facebook off the internet. Like literally, you try going to Facebook or you open up a Facebook app, and I think it also might have taken down WhatsApp and Instagram. It was a while ago that it happened, but nobody was able to access Facebook at the very least. And that actually took Facebook a lot longer to mitigate. Like I said, with Cloudflare, I think things were only down for maybe a little bit over an hour. And this issue with Facebook almost certainly resulted in a much higher loss of revenue. I mean, definitely for Facebook in particular, since Cloudflare, they're kind of outsourcing, or not outsourcing, but they're creating this CDN as a service for other people to use, whereas for Facebook, they're mostly the ones using their CDN. And of course, with Facebook, part of their business model is showing ads. So clearly nobody was going to be seeing Facebook ads if Facebook was down. And it had a huge impact to them. It was almost as bad as Apple with their app tracking transparency in terms of reducing the effectiveness of Facebook ads and causing Facebook to lose money. So BGP is necessary for these very large private IP networks to establish routing between one another and, well, the internet. So here is a graph of Cloudflare's HTTP request, and I don't think they have anything on the y-axis here, but I would have to imagine that these are millions or billions of requests that they're getting. So we have the timeline down here, so you can see where this change first started, and it started being pushed out to their routers, but it didn't really start affecting anything until the change hit their spines a little bit before 6:30, and then within a couple of minutes, immediately the traffic is dropping off. Looks like about 2/3 almost of the traffic drops off, and it only took them a few minutes, around 6:32 UTC, for Cloudflare to notice that there was a problem, and within 26 minutes, they had figured out the problem and they started reverting the changes, which unfortunately could not be undone as fast as the mistakes were made. So you see the rollbacks were a little bit slower than the drop-off in service. Then the rollbacks were complete a little bit after 7:40. Now, you're probably wondering what could have caused an outage like this. Well, let's take a look at some of the configuration changes that were being made on Cloudflare's routers. So take a look at this, and what do you see here? What do you think is the issue with these changes? Well, it is right here. Okay, so this term, reject the rest, this should be at the end of the configuration file, or at least it should be below these parts here, because this is sort of like the ending of a firewall configuration file, right? Where we just have a catch-all at the end of the ports that we're going to specify to open. So this basically makes these two settings, the term for ADV site locales and the term 6 ADV site locales, invalid. So immediately this caused Cloudflare to stop advertising their site local prefixes, which moved direct access to all of the impacted locations, and the ability of their servers to reach origin servers. And this also messed up their load balancing. So yeah, their network was all kinds of screwed up during this outage. But thankfully, it didn't last long. It wasn't quite like Facebook's BGP problem, which I think was one of the more serious ones in recent times, considering that the Facebook engineers also locked themselves out of their systems, which made fixing the bug take hours longer. And I think that this was also fixed faster than the outages that Cloudflare had in 2020 and in 2019. So it seems like they're at least getting better at responding to outages when they do happen, but this goes to show you why really big corporations just end up creating their own CDNs. Because it gets to a certain point where if you're making millions of dollars in sales an hour, well, yeah, it definitely justifies it at that point. An hour of downtime for you would be a really big deal in that case. But if you're using Cloudflare for yourself, it might even be a good idea for you to have some sort of a fallback system. Maybe even just go back to the classic style of people accessing your site without a CDN. Obviously, that's not as efficient. That's not what you would want to use primarily, but it's better for people to be able to access your site slowly than not at all. So maybe you could have that available for the outages that Cloudflare seems to have every couple of years. But that's it for this video, guys. Like and comment, tag the algorithm. Follow me on Odyssey. Have a great day.